Now, Billy McKee was the man that approached me on terms of the first hunger strike, and he was not there in the second hunger strike because there was an internal coup. Northern Command in the Republican movement had taken over. So the first indication I got was when Billy McKee came down here, sat here, and says, in typical McKee's notion, Billy McKee is a straight down the middle Republican. Billy would seldom, if ever, talk. I was not a member of their organisation, therefore Billy would, a very generous man, and I like him, but he was not for having conversations with me per se. And he came down here and he sat here, actually, in this corner, and he said, something's got to be done about this, something's got to be done about this, these men are so and so. And Billy McKee spent 2 hours in the most passionate language about people in prison. He was as close to tears as you could have got. And he was saying things like, I would rather people would die fighting than be in prison. I'm completely opposed to it. He says, I was on hunger strike, I wasn't frightened of dying, but he says it is the most isolated situation. And that was his message. There's one rather humorous situation happened at the time. There's a new door up here, you don't see it, but it's one of those OK type doors. And I says to Billy, Billy, what do you think of the door? And he says, oh, I don't like that door. I don't like that door at all. I says, why not? He says, it reminds me of coffins. And that was an inner view as to where Billy McKee was. Now, I want to say something as truthfully as I can possibly say it. I had no real interest in the prisons, the hunger strikes. What I saw was the opportunity of renewing the dialogue between the British and the IRA. My task was that this thing would be reorganised and people would meet again, and maybe a second time round. What happened on that particular occasion then was I got in touch with it must have been Oakley, yes. I got in touch with Oakley and I says, look here, this is crazy, we want to sort it and solve it, and that began the first hunger strike situation. Now people are beginning to understand that the provisional IRA and Sinn Féin didn't want the first hunger strikes. Now, the reason they didn't want it was quite simple. It disrupted lines of communication. It disrupted war material coming into the country. It disrupted their war on the British. And this is where the tragedy comes in. It disrupted the British war on the IRA. So they did not want it under any circumstances. And the 5 demands were obtainable in various ways. Political status, that thing was never obtainable. And when the Republicans got the document that I handed over to Father Maher, who had never seen before or since, that was taken in. That document had enough in it to sort things out. Prison governor and the prison senior service, senior people were quite determined that this was not going to happen. Now, it wasn't that they disobeyed the law, they were inflexible. And you see, again, you have to try and understand. 18 or maybe at that stage 12 of them, I don't know how many were murdered. You've got that situation. They were in no mood for compromising with terrorists in jail. And the governor, I think, was Hildrich at that particular time. His attitude was perfectly straightforward. Here are the rules of the prison. Here is what I have been, from Her Majesty, been put down to do. You obey that. You do this. You do that, and so forth. And everything he was saying was absolutely ticked off in the button. And basically, that whole scene broke down in the disciplinarian approach of the staff. The British did not admit at any time in that that moment. They did not admit that it was the prison staff and governors that were pulling the line down. They were saying to me, there's enough there. If Sands wants to go and kill himself, that's his bit. So when the second hunger strike was coming, I was in a different position in terms of knowledge and understanding. But I again repeat, I did not know that Adams McGuinness had moved in and that the Brady people were being distant. Met Donald frequently in London, and what I liked about Donald was that he really had no space for rubbish, you know, what I call. Donald would tell you where it's at. The kind of things I remember Donald was saying things like, Brendan, you have enough, this could be settled. Brendan, there is no more will happen. You know, he was the Iron Curtain of the British government. After Sands was Francis Hughes. Francis Hughes, there was no British interest in saving his life. He was a gunman, he was a terrorist, he was up in the hills. Again, trying to think about it like this, could you imagine somebody coming to the Home Secretary or whoever it was and saying, look, really we have to give a bit of consideration? The feeling wasn't there. And it was only after the fourth and going into the fifth death that the British began to realise that this thing was bigger than they had thought. And there was a change of mood at that time. I got a call from Donald, and he says, will you come to London? I says, when? He says, no, immediately, whenever that was, I don't know. Went over, lovely hotel, and there's an interesting situation, because generally they'd be meeting in hotels, and endless meeting in hotels and places. There was always a distance, and it's quite hard to actually talk heavy stuff when you're even 2 feet apart. So on this particular occasion, Donald had chosen a seat, in which we were sitting together like this, which is quite unusual. And that's the sort of nuance you had to be ready to pick up. And I said, I wonder what's happening here. And he looked at me, he said, if it were possible to get the understanding that any change in the prison regime, they always talked about change in the prison regime, very careful wording, would be seen not to be a Republican only demand, but could be seen to cover all prisoners, then it might be easier to move forward. And then he looked at me and he said, there is enough here, Brendan, to sort this out, right? So I come back and basically sent the message to McGuinness, and then the statement come out of the prisons. And then it showed the lack of experience of that time. There was a lot of unhappiness within the Republican groupings because they felt there should have been an immediate Secretary of State and whoever made some bland statement to say there can't be any change in the prison and so forth, which is typical as to how these things work. Now, the O'Brady's of those days and various other people would have, 100 hours of conversation would have read between those lines. So there was annoyance that this major effort got nowhere. Not quite as black and white as I'm putting it. So that was the first major move. But again, and this has to be stressed in the historic nature of this, the dialogue that then happened on that telephone there, just day and night, day and night, day and night. If the document which was lodged in the record had been produced at that time, if Donald had says, Brendan, there's what we're prepared to do, it would have been all over. But that was not there. And the difficulty with the people, and they've a right to do it, who are demanding now a public inquiry and so forth, miss the point that that was not available. And therefore, it was Donald to me, Amita McGuinness and so forth, and any piece of it would have gone wrong. Back to that night, McGuinness was in the sleeping bag. McGuinness woke up and I says to him, I says, Martin, this is the end of the line. And he left here and went down to the street to Bernie's house, which I say is a joke, but you can just imagine, you know, like the notion that my phone's tapped but hers wasn't, you know. So come back. I can't remember, 10, 15 minutes later, obviously having a conversation with the kitchen cabinet in Belfast, and Martin's come back and he says, that is not enough. I says, Martin, this is as far as they're going. He said, it is not enough. And I said at that particular moment, I says, Martin, this is as far as it's going. The British are not going to move. And he says, it is not enough. And that was ended the conversation. Did the British make an effort to solve it? Yes. Did they do a simple enough? No. Could it be solved? I think it was one of those areas that tragically had to play itself out.